War has always been fought with whatever tools are at hand, but during the Second World War this principle became a matter of survival. In occupied territories where weapons were scarce, resistance fighters and civilians turned farm sheds, scrap piles and abandoned factories into armories. These were not polished weapons from military depots, but crude, improvised tools that could still deal lethal blows. The story of these homemade weapons is more than just history. It's a lesson in resilience, resourcefulness and survival that still applies today. If you've ever wondered how ordinary people transformed scrap metal and farm tools into instruments of war, stay tuned, because this is one of the most gripping chapters of World War II survival ingenuity. Farmers and blacksmiths became weapon makers when supplies vanished. When Nazi Germany occupied large parts of Europe, weapons were the first thing confiscated. Resistance groups suddenly found themselves empty-handed. But where there were no rifles, there were still hammers, shovels and ploughshares. Blacksmiths who once repaired wagon wheels learned to sharpen scythes into polearms. Farmers with welding skills reforged iron scraps into spear points, or bolted knives to wooden poles, creating makeshift pikes. These may seem primitive in an age of machine guns, but in ambushes, raids and night attacks they could be deadly. The key principle was adaptation. A pitchfork might be bent, its tines shortened and sharpened into a thrusting weapon for close combat. A heavy sledgehammer could double as a war hammer, capable of breaking bones or helmets. Even today, someone practicing preparedness can take a lesson here. Knowing how to repurpose farm and workshop tools means you're never truly unarmed. Scrap metal became the raw material for underground arsenals. Scrap heaps became as valuable as weapon caches. Resistance groups collected rails, pipes and old car parts to forge knives, bayonets and even crude firearms. In Poland, the underground Home Army managed to construct submachine guns called the Błyskawica, made almost entirely from scavenged metal and bicycle parts. These weren't mass-produced in factories. They were welded together in hidden workshops, smuggled piece by piece to fighters. For survivalists today, the takeaway is that metal, no matter how rusted or bent, carries potential. A length of steel pipe can become a club, a shotgun barrel, or a spear shaft. Old springs can be reworked into traps or cutting edges. 1-2 resistance fighters didn't see junk, they saw possibilities. The practical step here is to learn basic metalworking and keep simple hand tools, because even limited skill allows transformation of useless scraps into functional gear. Farm tools were modified into silent and effective close combat weapons. Silent killing was a necessity when fighting an occupying army. Firearms drew attention, but a sharpened spade or scythe made no sound. In the Soviet countryside, partisans often used entrenching tools, the standard soldier's folding shovel, as sharpened axes for ambushes. With one strong blow, these shovels could cut through bone. Farmers adapted this idea by grinding down the edges of their hoes and shovels into razor-sharp blades. Resistance fighters in France often carried modified sickles or pruning shears for close encounters. A sharpened hay hook could hook a soldier off balance or strike the throat. These weren't weapons designed in blueprints, they were deadly because they used muscle, leverage and surprise. A modern parallel is in keeping your tools sharp and versatile. A spade in the shed is not just for gardening. With slight modification, it becomes a reliable defensive implement if all else fails. Traps and improvised explosives were made from household supplies. Perhaps the most ingenious and, well, dangerous homemade weapons were the traps and explosives built from common materials. Fertilizers rich in nitrates were repurposed into bombs. Glass bottles filled with gasoline and fitted with rags became Molotov cocktails. A weapon simple enough for anyone to assemble, but devastating against vehicles and patrols. In Denmark and Norway, resistance groups perfected the art of rigging booby traps using wire, nails and scrap metal to wound or kill enemy soldiers. For survivalists, this really shows the importance of understanding chemical basics and mechanics. Even if you never replicate explosives, just knowing how to use fuel containers and ignition safely in controlled environments gives you a solid foundation for survival engineering. A practical step, honestly, is to study fire control and safe handling of flammables. Because in a crisis, that sort of knowledge can be adapted into all sorts of life-saving tools. The resistance fighters of the Second World War remind us that survival isn't about having the best gear. It's about knowing how to adapt. Farm tools, scrap heaps, and even household items were turned into weapons of war simply because people refused to surrender. For today's preparedness mindset, the value isn't in copying exact weapons, but in practicing the skills that made improvisation possible. Learn how to sharpen steel. Practice woodworking to create handles and shafts. Keep basic workshop tools in your shed, and above all, build the mindset that nothing is useless if you're willing to reshape it. When a French farmer could turn a shovel into a blade and a Polish mechanic could build a machine gun from bicycle parts, well, it just proves that ingenuity is often the greatest weapon. In survival situations, that lesson is, honestly, more relevant than ever. The homemade weapons of the Second World War are not just relics of the past. They're lessons in determination and adaptation. They show how ordinary people stood against powerful armies with nothing but courage and creativity. For survivalists and history buffs alike, these stories prove that knowledge is as powerful as steel. If you found this guide valuable, make sure to subscribe to Backyard Wisdom and share this with others who want to learn the practical side of history. There are more hidden survival lessons in the past just waiting to be uncovered, and together we'll keep those lessons alive.